There's something about stepping off the grid that hits you differently when you finally lose signal. 1 second, my phone was searching. The next, nothing, just that empty bar and the weight of it in my pocket. Rachel had already turned hers off earlier on the trail, but I liked knowing it was there, just in case. That quiet, sudden cutoff felt like someone severing a thin wire tethering us to the rest of the world. We had followed a narrow deer trail that veered off the main route, pushing through bramble and ducking under low-hanging pine. It wasn't part of any official map, at least not the one the park had handed out at the ranger station, but Rachel spotted it during our hike and insisted it had the good kind of mystery to it. I wasn't so sure, but it was hard to say no to that look of hers. The spot we settled on wasn't marked, but it was perfect. Just enough of a slope to keep the ground dry, a mossy ridge to block the wind, and a lazy stream burbling just out of sight beyond the tree line. We made camp beneath a towering canopy of spruce and birch, the scent of sap and decaying leaves thick in the air. A fallen log made the perfect bench beside our little fire pit. It felt like one of those rare weekends where everything might go right. Later that afternoon, with the tent pitched and gear stowed, we explored. It started with idle wandering, kicking through leaves, pointing out mushrooms, listening to the rustle of something small darting through the underbrush. A kind of scavenger hunt without a goal. That's when we found the clearing. It didn't jump out at us right away. The forest simply thinned, and then, like peeling back a curtain, we were in it. The trees bent outward unnaturally, as if they'd been pressed back by force or had learned to grow away from this spot. The ground was mossy but flat, tamped down in places like it had been walked on repeatedly. And in the center was the circle. A ring of stones about knee-high stood in perfect formation. 12 of them, almost like someone had planted them deliberately or perhaps dragged them in from elsewhere. Weathered, dark with age, but clean, no moss, no growth, no leaves. Just dry earth inside. It looked older than anything else around it. Too symmetrical to be accidental. At the center of the circle was the food. Not old trail mix or something left behind in a forgotten Ziploc. This was fresh. There were slices of what looked like mango, though it had no business being out here. Several hard-boiled eggs, a bundle of nuts tied in twine. And in the middle of it all, a lump of raw meat. Dark red and glistening. Thick, like a cut of liver. The kind of meat that bleeds even when it's not supposed to. We stood there longer than we should have. Long enough to feel our skin react to the sudden chill in the air. There was no smell, which struck me as odd. Not even the rich iron scent of blood or the sweet rot of fruit gone bad. It was just still. I remember the way Rachel folded her arms tight across her chest, even though she hadn't said anything. I didn't either. We backed out of the clearing without stepping inside the circle. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. Back at camp, we made a joke out of it. Or tried to. Said it must have been a weird ranger ritual. Or something left by a particularly crunchy forest dweller with strong opinions about the spirits of nature. We even tossed out the idea of leaving our own offering the next day. Maybe some granola bars or a stale protein shake. Just to even the playing field. But the moment we zipped the tent shut that night, something shifted. There was no wind. No rustle. Even the insects had gone silent. Lying there with only the thin fabric between us and the world, I could hear the blood in my ears, and then, underneath that, the chewing. It wasn't the crisp snap of a squirrel shelling a nut or the grunt chomp of a bear tearing into something unfortunate. This was slower, methodical, vet, like someone working through a steak with no teeth. Sloppy, labored chewing that came and went in waves. At first, it was far off, like it was moving through the trees. Then it paused. Then it started again, closer this time. We held still, not out of fear. At least that's what I told myself, but to listen, really listen. It didn't sound like any animal I knew. No chaflimpos, no growl or huff. Just the wet, determined gnawing of something that wanted to be heard. Eventually, it stopped. Sleep came in fits after that. I kept waking up thinking I heard breathing that wasn't ours. Rachel's back was warm against mine, and I didn't dare move. Morning arrived with silver light filtering through the tent fabric, and, for a second, everything felt normal again. Until I opened the flap. The bear bag was gone. Not torn, Not shredded. Gone. We had hoisted it a good 10 feet up, suspended from a tree branch with cord and counterweight. The cord was still there, swinging gently like something had just let go of it, but the bag itself had vanished. No scraps, no teeth marks, not even crumbs. Our cooler, zipped inside the vestibule of the tent, had been opened. Not slashed, not bitten, opened. The zipper sat in a neat little curve like someone had done it slowly and deliberately. Inside, nothing remained, not even the wrappers. What chilled me most was the absence of mess. No tracks, no chaos, no sign of struggle. Just gone, like it had been invited. Rachel stared out at the woods without saying a word. I think we both had the same thought, but weren't ready to give it shape yet. We didn't mention the circle that morning. We didn't need to. It was already part of the woods now, rooted in our minds like a splinter you can't quite dig out. And somewhere, past the trees, that chewing sound was still happening. Not close, not yet, but moving, always moving. The second day started in silence. A different kind of quiet from the one we'd hoped for. The peaceful, phoneless, distant from the world kind. This was thicker, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. Even the stream sounded quieter somehow, muffled like it was flowing beneath glass. We busied ourselves in the way people do when they're trying not to talk about something. Rearranged the tent, gathered wood, cleaned gear that didn't need cleaning. The missing food was a conversation neither of us wanted to start, but it sat with us anyway in every pause and sideways glance. Later that afternoon, Rachel repacked what little food we had left. A couple of protein bars, some dried fruit, jerky she'd stashed in her day pack. Barely enough for the trip back, let alone another night. But it was something. We strung it up again, this time farther, higher, and double-knotted with a paranoia we didn't speak aloud. The rope bit into my palms as I hoisted the bag, our last few rations swinging like a pendulum against the backdrop of forest stillness. The tent zippers were tested twice, once by me and once by her. Everything locked down. Packs inside. Flashlights ready. Fire stoke high. The sun was already dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows that didn't quite match the shape of the trunks that made them. When the chewing came back, it didn't creep in like the night before. It arrived, abrupt and brazen, just as the fire dwindled and we retreated into the tent. It started far off, sure, but with less hesitation, like something that already knew its way around. No longer testing the edges, but approaching something familiar. This time it sounded different, not just louder, hungrier. There was rhythm to it now, like someone savoring a meal they'd waited too long for. Vet, snapping, breathing between bites. I lay still, listening to the rise and fall of it. Rachel was beside me, rigid under the sleeping bag, her breath shallow and steady, but not sleeping. There was a moment when the chewing stopped altogether. No wind, no bugs, no forest sounds, just that thick, pregnant silence again. That might have been worse, because in the gap, I thought I heard something else. Something breathing. It was low and irregular, like the way someone sounds when they cry into a pillow. Faint, distant, but it scraped at something in my chest. I wanted to believe it was an animal. Some raccoon dragging off scraps, or a fox tearing through undergrowth. But I couldn't convince myself of that. Not this time. We didn't sleep, just faded in and out of shallow awareness, until the light outside turned gray again. I was the first to unzip the tent. The morning air hit my face with a heavy dampness. Not dew, exactly. It smelled like wet wood and sap, but also something else. Something sour and sweet all at once, like tree rot and overripe fruit. Our fire pit was smoldering, not in a natural way. The logs we'd left unburned had been rearranged, piled differently. Coals that should have been dead were glowing faintly beneath a scattering of fresh ash. It looked, tended to, as if someone or something had stirred it during the night. There were no new tracks. The ground around it remained pristine, but the fire told a different story. Rachel found it first, the stone's circle. We hadn't planned to go back there, but our feet brought us anyway, like something needed checking. Some dark compulsion. The same way you check the rearview mirror after seeing something strange on the road. You don't expect anything, but you look anyway. You always look. This time, the offering was different. Inside the circle were our missing rations. The first night's food, half-eaten granola wrappers, a dented can of tuna, a ripped protein bar, arranged precisely as we had found the previous offerings. It mirrored what we'd seen before, but with a cruel twist. The meat from last night had been torn open, and something had bitten into the mango, leaving a perfect crescent shape. The jerky had been chewed and spit out in a slimy heap in the center. Even a hard-boiled egg was peeled and cracked open. Not eaten, just presented. All of it sat untouched by bugs. No flies, no ants, just a strange scent lingering in the air and the oppressive weight of being watched. I felt it on the back of my neck. Not the sensation of eyes on you, but something else. Like the forest itself had taken a breath and was waiting to exhale. Rachel didn't follow me back to camp right away. I left her standing there, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the stones like they might blink back at her. She came back eventually, but something had changed. She wouldn't meet my eyes. It wasn't until early evening that she finally said something, and even then it wasn't much. She thought I was messing with her, that I had put the food there myself, that I was trying to freak her out. I shook my head and tried to explain. I didn't even know how to get back to the clearing on my own. The path in felt like it kept changing. The trees never looked the same. She didn't believe me. It got worse when we checked our phones. We hadn't used them since the first day, and they'd both been powered off, just dead weights in our packs. But Rachel's screen lit up to a new notification, an alert that her storage was nearly full. That didn't make sense. We'd taken maybe 3 photos the whole trip. The gallery opened to a single video file, time-stamped around 2:16 a.m., recorded during the night we thought we hadn't slept. It was less than a minute long, taken from just outside the tent. The video began in total darkness, just the dim silhouette of our tent against the backdrop of black woods. The camera shook like it was being held at a child's height, or lower. There was movement along the tree line, slow, jittery, like something didn't know how to walk properly. At first we thought it was wind, branches swaying, but the shapes moved independently of the trees. Long, angular bodies swaying forward, twitching with every step. Thin, too thin, and tall. They didn't walk. They shivered forward. One of them stopped just feet from the tent, tilting its head in a jagged, unnatural way, like a broken bird examining prey. A second figure appeared behind it, reaching out with arms longer than any human's. No fingers, just spindled points at the end of each limb. They didn't speak, but there was sound. A thick, slick noise like wet cloth being twisted. Chewing. Rhythmic. Giddy. And then, abruptly, the camera fell. The video ended with the image of the forest floor pressed against damp leaves. No footsteps. No retreat. Just silence. We watched it once. Only once. Then Rachel turned her phone off and buried it in her pack without a word. The sun was already behind the trees, shadows stretching like they were being pulled. I didn't want to light another fire. I didn't want to attract anything else. But the cold was creeping in, and the dark with it. That night, the chewing didn't start right away. It waited, and I don't know which was worse. We made a silent decision that night. No sleep. Not that either of us could have forced it at that point. Our nerves were too frayed, muscles too tight, minds stretched thin from the sound of something not quite human feasting just beyond our reach the night before. The fire was left cold this time, a deliberate choice. Any warmth it offered felt secondary to the sickening thought that its light might act like a beacon, an invitation to whatever had been roaming between the trees. We sat inside the tent, back to back, wrapped in our sleeping bags like armor, waiting for the dark to turn on us. The forest didn't rustle that night. Not even the smallest insect dared stir. That wasn't natural. Forests never stay quiet unless they're waiting. It pressed in on us from every side, heavy and low like we were being buried under a slow-moving tide of soil. Hours passed in that aching silence. Time melted, dissolved. It could have been minutes or decades. The night didn't care. Then came the chewing. Not distant, not subtle. It started like a slap. Moist, squelching bites just feet for where we sat frozen. It didn't drift from the tree line this time. It was already here. Wet sounds filled the tent like something was gnawing at the air itself. Each breath it took was thick and gurgling, broken by little snorts of pleasure. It was feeding, not just eating feeding. The noise came from one side of the tent and then the other. Dragging steps moved with it, shuffling, deliberate, slow as if whatever it was didn't need to hurry anymore. It had found us. The game was over. Something brushed against the nylon, light, like a fingertip tracing the tent wall. Then another dragging step, then more chewing. It circled, never speaking, never showing itself. Only the sounds, the feeding, the slow, measured scraping of something sliding against the canvas. At some point, I realized I was gripping the flashlight like a weapon. Not turned on, just holding it as if it might help. Rachel's breathing had changed. It was faster but not panicked. Steady in that sharp way when you're balancing right on the edge of fight or flight. When the zipper began to move, we bolted. I don't remember shouting. Maybe I did. Maybe it was silent and sudden. A burst of motion as the zipper slid open from the outside like a knife cutting into the dark. The flashlight snapped on mid-motion, beams slicing wildly into the woods beyond. There was nothing there. No tracks. No steps. No creatures skulking away. Just trees, towering, still, and motionless. The air smelled sickly sweet again, sap, rot meat. The beam of the flashlight trembled, catching on nothing until it swept toward the clearing. Something was different. We moved toward it, pulled by the same cold curiosity that had brought us there the first time. This time we didn't speak. Words felt wrong out here. The circle was waiting for us. The stones just as tall, just as perfect. But the offering had changed. At the center lay a rabbit. Its body was torn open from throat to belly, gutted with surgical precision. The blood hadn't soaked into the soil yet. It was still twitching, barely. The head lolled to one side, eyes wide, cloudy. One leg kicked once weakly, then stopped. Beneath a low-hanging branch, not 10 feet from the circle, something swayed in the breeze. At first it looked like rope, dark, twisted, fraying at the ends. But as the flashlight beam settled on it, the texture told a different story. Hair, braided tightly, knotted crudely at intervals. Long strands of it, some straight, some coarse, some lighter than others. Not all human, or maybe none of it was. The braid swung gently, brushing the branch as if trying to get our attention. We backed away, slowly. The circle didn't follow, but it didn't have to. Something was shifting. The forest itself felt different. Rachel was the first to notice the trees. They were the same as before, but not. The bark was wrong. Where once there had been normal roughness, now the trunks seemed swollen in places. Smooth, in unnatural patterns. Pocked with deep circular indentations, ringed with ridges. Not from woodpeckers. Not weather. They looked like mouths. Open knots that gaped in the bark like puckered lips. Some wider than a fist. Others just small slits, wet with sap that dripped down the trunks like drool. The resin caught the flashlight beam, shining like oil. The smell was stronger now. Spoiled sweetness. Some of the mouths had something inside. A tongue of moss, or maybe something else. We didn't look too long. It wasn't just one tree. It was several. Half a dozen at least, all clustered near the clearing. As if they'd leaned in together over the years, grown toward the source of their next meal. One tree in particular stood out. It was the oldest, thicker than a car, its bark darker than the rest. The flashlight beam skimmed over a section that looked smoother than the rest, a patch free of moss or bark, almost polished. There, carved deeply into its side, were the words, "Do not starve US again." The bark around the letters was lighter, fresher, like it hadn't been there long, like it had healed before, then opened again. It wasn't carved with a blade. The grooves were too organic, almost chewed into the surface. We didn't linger. Back at camp, the tent was unzipped just as we'd left it. Nothing taken, nothing destroyed. That made it worse. It hadn't come for our things. We didn't speak the rest of the night. Just sat, backs pressed together, flashlight dead by then, listening to every creak of the forest. But there were no more sounds. No more chewing. No footsteps. Just the pulsing silence of something watching. Waiting. I don't remember when my eyes finally closed. Only that when they did, the last thing I saw in my mind, I was the braid swaying gently. and the twitching leg of the rabbit. Still alive. Still offered. That morning, there were new footprints around her tent. Not boots. Not paws. Long, narrow imprints that ended in drag marks. They circled us like ritual, and all of the trees were smiling. They left at dawn, or what they thought was dawn. The light wasn't right, thin and scattered, like it had been filtered through layers of cloud and memory. The color of it changed subtly with each breath, going from pink to pale green to something the narrator couldn't name. But it was enough. Enough to see, enough to run. The tent came down in minutes, stakes yanked from the soil and cords tangled in panicked hands. They didn't bother packing carefully. Gear was shoved into bags, zippers jammed. Half of it was left behind. What mattered now was escape. They found a trail easily. The same one they'd used to come in, still marked faintly by the bent branches and the notches Rachel had made with her knife. A breadcrumb trail of small disturbances. They followed it without speaking, just the rustle of leaves and the thud of boots on loam. For a moment, it felt like movement meant progress. But the forest didn't thin. The slope never changed. The trees blurred into each other, tall, twisted shapes that shifted when glanced at sideways. It was Rachel who stopped first, mouth slightly open, the air around her suddenly too still. Ahead of them, through the brush, was the clearing. The stone circle stood, just as before, unchanged, patient. The gutted rabbit was gone now. In its place was something wrapped in cloth, a bundle they dared not approach. No sound came from it. The trees leaned inward again, their knot mouths weeping fresh sap in long, glistening strings. They turned back and tried another path. Any path. Straight lines that curved when they weren't looking. Familiar boulders reappeared like echoes. Their footprints crossed their own tracks in patterns that made no sense. Even the light betrayed them. The sun flickered above, skipping forward in jittering leaps, then stalling again. A scratched record in the sky. The narrator checked the GPS. The screen pulsed with coordinates that didn't exist. Longitude twisted into letters. Elevation read as symbols. At one point, the map showed them standing in the center of a black void, surrounded by text that looped endlessly. Hunger, 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 hunger. They split off briefly, only briefly in desperation, Rachel sprinting ahead with her bag bouncing against her spine. He called out, chasing her shadow between the trees, the underbrush clawing at his legs. But when he turned the corner, she'd vanished. No sound, no scream, just gone. The narrator ran forward until his knees hit the forest floor. Her boots were there, both of them, sitting side by side, laces loose, like she'd stepped out of them without slowing down. But that wasn't what made his stomach turn. The ground beneath the boots was disturbed. Not dug up, not torn apart, just shifted, as if something had risen from below, swallowed, then settled. A perfect oval of discolored soil ringed with dark streaks of sap and small indentations. Like fingers or teeth. A few feet away stood an enormous oak, the largest he'd ever seen. Its bark was old and cracked, gnarled with thick folds like ancient skin. But there, just near the base, were the marks. Stretching across the lower trunk were faint indentations, curving slightly inward. Not scratches, not carvings, stretch marks. The bark had expanded recently, like something had been pushing out from the inside, or pulled inward from the outside. It pulsed, almost imperceptibly, with each gust of air, though the wind had long since died. The narrator dropped to his knees and began to dig. His fingers clawed into the loam, flinging aside clumps of root and stone. The deeper he went, the more the ground changed. The soil turned dark, almost black. It clung to him, warm, wet. Roots slithered through the hole like veins. Not the dry, fibrous kind, these pulsed beneath his hands. Some moved, others bled. Thick amber resin oozed from wounds in the root system, trailing down into the hollow space he was opening. Then he heard it, her voice, muffled, distant, but calling. At first, it was unmistakable. Rachel, whispering his name through layers of earth and wood, pleading, choking back sobs, telling him she was stuck, that it was dark, that it hurt. He called back, voice cracking, hands shaking. He dug faster, pulling apart the roots, pushing deeper until he hit something that felt soft beneath the surface. But then the voice changed. It stuttered mid-sentence, skipped. Words repeated themselves. The tone warped, higher, then lower, then something metallic. Rachel again, then not, then a voice like hers but not her. Too many vowels, too perfect, like a recording played back by someone who had never heard a human before. It laughed, a dry, rattling giggle that buzzed behind his eyes. Then it sobbed in Rachel's tone. Then it begged again, but in a language he didn't understand. He screamed for her, screamed until his throat felt raw. But the voices kept shifting, a chorus inside the tree. Dozens of whispers now, not just hers, others, male, female, children, all blending, all trapped. The roots began to close. Slowly, the hole refilled itself, pulsing tendrils of bark knitting together like muscle tissue. The bleeding stopped. The amber resin hardened in thin sheets, sealing the ground like a scab. His hands slapped uselessly at the surface. When he looked up, the tree had changed again. New marks had appeared, more words etched into the trunk, deeper now, gouged in fresh wounds that wept sap like tears. We fed, you starved, she stays. The sky above pulsed once, then blinked. The sun skipped backward, then forward again. The shadows were wrong, stretched in every direction, like light came from a dozen different angles. The forest was feeding, and now it had a voice. Hers, and many more. The last night began without him knowing it had started. At some point, time ceased to feel linear. He would close his eyes to blink and wake hours later, face down in the dirt, unsure how he'd gotten there. His hands were always dirty now, nails caked with soil, palms raw and scratched like he'd been crawling. He tasted blood sometimes. His own, not always. The tent remained, though he hadn't slept inside it for what felt like days. Or hours. He couldn't tell anymore. Each time he returned, the sleeping bag had shifted. The zipper moved a few inches. Things were missing, once his boots, another time the flashlight. The forest didn't take them. He was the one who kept moving them. Sleep no longer meant rest. He would close his eyes just to stop seeing, only to awaken somewhere else. He had no dreams, only impressions, wet sounds, thick sap on his skin, tree roots curling over his ankles. And the chewing. Always the chewing. The worst was when he woke in the clearing. He remembered sitting in the circle, slouched forward, cradling something in his lap. His arms were covered in small cuts, some fresh, some crusted over. The air was cold. Not natural cold, but rot cold. A dampness that clung to the bones. He couldn't move for a moment, couldn't understand what he was holding. It was another rabbit, or what was left of one, its body mangled, fur torn free in patches, belly split wide. One of its ears had been cleanly removed. He couldn't remember killing it, but his hand said otherwise. There was blood under every nail. He dropped the thing in horror and staggered backward, slipping through the dirt and moss. He had lost time again, but it was more than that now. The gaps were growing. The forest was taking from him bits of memory, pieces of will. He wasn't being hunted anymore. He was being shaped, conditioned. The thoughts weren't always his. He'd catch himself thinking things that felt placed, like words written in someone else's handwriting and read aloud in his head. Feed them. Honor the offering. She's quiet now. Something had been feeding him too, just not with food. That was when he saw it. Something jutting from beneath one of the stones. A corner of leather, barely visible through the weeds and dust. He dug with trembling fingers, pulling out a small journal. The cover was cracked, edges frayed, pages swollen from age and moisture. The writing inside was clean, looping cursive written in fading ink. The first entry was dated 30 years ago. A park ranger named Wells. As he read, the world tilted. The entries began innocently. Wildlife surveys, trail maintenance, weather notes. But it shifted quickly. The ranger described finding a stone circle. Food offerings. Strange chewing at night. Trees that bled sap and opened like mouths. He turned the pages faster. There was an entry about a woman named Rachel. Same name, same eyes, the ranger wrote. Same disbelief. There was mention of a man, his own name, written over and over again. Dialogue appeared that he recognized word for word. The journal even described the journal itself. The entries became frantic. Pages darkened with smeared ink and dirt. The handwriting wavered, erratic. The ranger said the forest fed every 30 years, that the trees remembered, that the woods replayed the same story. A cycle, always a couple, always an offering, and always one who vanished, one who returned. He dropped the journal like it had bitten him. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of scorched wood. The forest had gone still again, too still. He didn't know what made him do it, but he grabbed the fuel canister from their old camp and stumbled back to the clearing. It was instinct, or desperation, or rage. Maybe all three. The stones glistened in the moonlight, wet with dew or something else. The circle pulsed faintly, as if breathing. He splashed the fuel without ceremony, hands shaking. The smell choked him, but he didn't stop. The match flared. For a moment, the clearing lit like day. Fire danced across the stones, climbing fast, hungry. The flames caught the moss, then the offerings, then the hair braid that still swung from its low branch. But the trees didn't burn. The fire hit them and stopped. The trunks absorbed the heat like skin drinking sunlight. Sap hissed and boiled, but nothing caught. The knot mouths opened wider, weeping dark resin. A low groaning sound rose from deep beneath the ground. He stumbled back, coughing, eyes streaming from smoke and something more primal. From the smoke stepped Rachel. She walked like her joints had forgotten how to bend, every step stiff and deliberate. Her clothes were torn, stained with sap and dirt. Her eyes were wrong, wide and empty, the pupils dull and washed out. Her mouth moved, but not naturally. It stretched too far. Her lips split at the corners, revealing teeth that weren't quite hers. They looked borrowed. She smiled, her head tilted in that jagged, puppet way he remembered from the video. Her voice came out like cracked porcelain, soft but hollow. It was hers, but also not. She said the words without moving her lips. He didn't hear them with his ears. He heard them in his head. It was his turn. The forest had waited. The chewing never stopped. He hears it now, even when everything else is silent. Not outside anymore. Inside, behind the eyes, at the base of the skull. The roots run deeper than anyone ever knew. And they're always hungry.